So today on Sports File, it's a request morning yet again. We're going to be taking a quick look at the Quebec Nordiques of the mid 1980s, and specifically the 1985 season. Now, for anybody that's been a fan of the Quebec Nordiques, there's always been an interesting concept of why they didn't win the Stanley Cup in that period. Now, I think basically the team overachieved in those seasons, especially in their contest against the Montreal Canadiens. Although they lost in 1984, in 1982 and 1985, they outlasted Montreal, who are obviously their big rivals. Now, the 84-85 season had the big three, as usual, for the Nordiques. Peter Stastnys, that great former Czechoslovakian national star, had 100 points in the 84-85 season. Even though he didn't score as many goals that season as other campaigns, he had a great total of 100 points. Goulet, that sniper, Michel Goulet, one of the top players of his era, had 55 goals that year. And Peter's brother Anton had 38 goals and 80 points. Now, Dale Hunter had a very consistent season that year with 72 points. Young stars like Brent Ashton and also the rugged Wilf Paiement ended up with 51 points. And Captain Mario Marois had a very solid season with 43 points, including 37 assists. And he had a lot of role players that year, like Paul Gillis had 14 goals. The overachiever Jean-François Sauvé had 42 points. And Alain Côté on the defensive side at 35. But, you know, the team was very well put together. There was young Norman Rochefort on defense. Tony McKechnie had an injury-plagued season, but, you know, he was a role player. And, of course, Bergeron Stastnys was still with the team, getting 21 points. So, overall, like a great, some great players, some great role players. And on the season, they started the season on a slow point. They only had 3 wins in their first 10 games, and they were in last place on that short point. Now, some people say the first half of the Nordic season was very mediocre, and it was. They only had a 16-6 record after 38 games. Now, the big change for Nordiques that season, Michel Bergeron, their head coach, has said many times, it was the big trade with for Brad Maxwell and Brett Ashton from the Minnesota North Stars in December, and it really got them out a better front. Now, rookie goalie Mario Gosselin had a team high 19 wins, and former Montreal Canadian Richard Savigny had 10 wins in 20 games. And of course, my favorite player, Daniel Bouchard, was still around. He had a 500 record in 29 games. Now, as the regular season ended, Montreal ended up in first place with 94 points. Nordiques' record was close by at 41, 30, and 9. Nordiques actually led the association, their league, division in scoring, so very consistent going into the playoffs. Now, the main problem with the playoffs at that time, it was your division could be tougher than you would even expect. Now, they had played the Sabres in the first round of the Avs division. They played Buffalo, of course, winning the first game 5-2, winning game 2 3-2, and finishing off the best of 5. Finish off the best of 5 in Game 5 after Buffalo won Game 3 and Game 4. But again, Quebec eked out a 6-5 win in Game 5 at the Colisée at the Buffalo Auditorium to take the division finals. Now, the big denouement, of course, when the Montreal Canadiens, and led by goalie Steve Penny, played Quebec in the second round. Quebec had the biggest opening of any series against Montreal. They won their first game 2-1 in overtime. Canadiens won game 2, and Quebec eked ahead in the third game of the Colisée 3-1, but it was, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Quebec would win in Montreal, Montreal would win in Quebec, and it would go from there. The big thing about Game 6, which Montreal won, Nordiques were trying to clinch at home. They eventually couldn't, and set up a Game 7. The famous Game 7 with Peter Stastnys scoring in overtime. And let me tell you something, it was a rough game, a very well played game. But Quebec again made it to the semi-final round. The problem with Quebec at the time, again, with Bergeron's style, they would win 1 or 2 goal games, but couldn't knock off their opponent where they needed to. And in the semi-finals, they played the very strong Philadelphia Flyers. And even though they opened the series with a 2-1 win, the Flyers basically were a little bit too strong for Quebec. It seemed that Quebec wasn't really at a level of the Flyers, especially on offense. And despite this, the Nordiques had enough of a strength to be heavy contenders in the NHL. But something, there were 1 or 2 players away from that next level. They could make it to the semifinals. They could beat Montreal, was shown they could survive their Adams division. But when it comes to the crossovers, they would lose. Now, what did Quebec need, in my opinion, to get to the championship level? Well, he needed 1 or 2 more players, either in trade or whatever. But the problem is he relied so much on the Stastnys brothers, on Goulet, like they had done when he got the Stastnys brothers from Czechoslovakia. And it came to a point where, Quebec had kind of peaked. Now, with the emergence of Patrick Roy in Montreal, the Nordiques really were not a factor, championship factor against Montreal and the other key teams on the what I call the eastern side. And that faded when the franchise fell in disarray. It came to a point a few years later. It basically was the laughing stock of the association. Could it be the goaltending? Could it be consistency on the second and third line? Really don't know. But eventually Quebec moved to Colorado. That's another story together for a future podcast. Now, what was very ironic about this whole situation, the Nordiques almost had their own TV network called Television de 15 Saisons. They would, the Quebec Independent would show their games on Thursday nights or during other key times during the week. As soon as the Nordiques left, the network basically very soon after folded. And it's kind of ironic that, a beer team like Carling O'Keefe was very strong with the Nordiques. A beer team would basically fold after so many successful NHL seasons. But what's kind of funny there? The Nordiques had their own fan base. I know many people who followed the Toronto Maple Leafs used to follow Nordiques because their style of play reminded them of a young, the young Toronto teams in the late 70s. The Nordiques had a passionate fan base in the Maritimes, especially Northern New Brunswick. People would go to the Colisée in Quebec and see 2 games in the weekend. People liked the atmosphere of the Colisée because, it was a Quebec junior AAA rink for many, many years. And the people in the Maritimes, obviously having the Nordiques farm team in the Maritimes, really, really endeared them to a lot of people. Now, the Battle of Quebec was only one level of Quebec's fan base. Again, they were a team that worked hard. Michel Bergeron had instilled a hard work ethic. They'd play because Michel Bergeron would set up a system. And don't forget, the Nordiques had some players that were unfortunate, were not doing it for the other teams. Doing it for the other teams they played for. The Nordiques were basically that overachievers. They would always overachieve a little bit, but they couldn't finish it off. Now, if the Nordiques would have made it to the Stanley Cup Finals, would there still be a Nordiques team? That's the question for the ages. I think they would, but it comes to a point with the Nordique system, they couldn't go to the next level, and then eventually there were downfall. So if you have a chance today, go on YouTube and check some of the former Quebec Nordique games, especially ones against Montreal. read up about the history of Peter Stastnys and Michel Goulet and some of the other players in Nordiques, Dale Hunter, you will not be disappointed. I miss the Nordiques because I miss any NHL team that gave so much joy to their fans. And the person who made the request, I'm not going to say who it is, but he said, I really love my Nordiques growing up. He said, I really loved the way he played. And, we all did. We had to respect the Nordiques, although Dale Hunter sometimes was a little bit off keel. How could you not respect the Stastnys brothers or Michel Goulet? Class acts all the way. So it's too bad he wouldn't sort out the goaltending. That's, I think, what really killed the franchise. Anyway, on this January day where the temperatures are rising in New Brunswick in anticipation of a big rainstorm, we wish you well. And if Michel Bergeron would say anything to the old Nordiques fans, he would probably say, we miss you as much as you miss us. Have a good day. Keep your stick in the ice. Bye.